Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. I want to welcome you to the presentation today. We're going to be talking about therapeutic day schools. We see the attendance is going up, so people are joining. So maybe I'll just cover some preliminary matters and then we'll get rolling. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We have just about an hour today, and this is a big topic because I'm going to try to cover both sort of how you get into a therapeutic day school and also how you get out of a therapeutic day school and back into the public school environment. And then briefly also talk about some things that happen while your child is in the therapeutic day school. So it's a lot. I could spend an hour just talking about getting in, but I will try to cover everything. Also, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jill Calian, and I'm one of the attorneys in Matt Cohen and Associates. I've been with the firm for about 2 years now, but had prior experience as a special education lawyer as well. And I'm also a parent of a child with a disability. And I hope that later in our presentation, one of my colleagues, Christine Palmieri, is supposed to join us. She is an advocate in the firm, and she has particular expertise in the realm of CPS, of the Chicago Public School System. And although CPS is subject to the same rules and regulations as everyone else, it sort of operates a little bit as its own animal. And Christine just has a terrific understanding of the way it operates, the people to talk to at various times, situations, who to consult, what the resources are there, and just how CPS operates that is sometimes different from the rest of the world. So she is hopefully going to join us. She had to be called away earlier, but she'll hop on later. And if she can't, I'll just cover her material as well. This presentation is being recorded, and we post them after the presentation. It usually takes about a week for us to get them up onto our website. But I encourage you to check out our website because it has a whole library of presentations like this, many webinars, and obviously it's free. It's a great resource for all of you. So definitely, if you're not able to finish the presentation today and you want to look back at it, you can find it there in about a week. And as I said, check out everything else that we have there as well. I have this set up as a webinar, so we're not able to, chat in a discussion format because there were a number of participants. I thought it might be unwieldy to have everybody, able to talk in conversation. But you can type questions into the chat, and our office manager, Tammy, is here running the presentation today, going through the Google Slides, and will let me know if there are questions that need to be answered during the time that I'm presenting. On that note, if you have things that are particular to specific situations, those are probably better addressed at the end. I'll also share my contact information. It's right here on the screen that we're all looking at. You can get in touch with me if you have questions about particular matters, so that we use our time fairly to everyone. But certainly, if you have something that comes up where you think what I said wasn't clear, do chime in and let us know so that I can straighten out whatever it is that I said and make it more clear. So with that, why don't we get going? Tammy, if you could move to the next slide. So I have introduced myself and mentioned Christine, and again, welcome to you all. Next, please. So let's start with what is a therapeutic day school. And first and foremost, it is an educational placement that is specialized. And I really wanted to hone in on that word specialized, because something that parents often hear from school districts in the context of these discussions around placement is that, well, a therapeutic day school, it's a more restrictive placement. And it is indeed a more restrictive placement. And believe me, we're going to talk a lot about that today. But I also want you to be thinking as a parent in those meetings, as as that the therapeutic day school is a more specialized environment. It's an environment where the people who are there, the teachers and the therapists, have a level of expertise. It is an environment that is designed specifically for children who are like yours. And sometimes it's important just to keep that in mind when you have these conversations, especially when the school district tries to sort of beat you up and make you feel like you're doing something terrible because you're moving your child to a more restrictive placement. Remember that it is indeed a more specialized environment with equipment and resources, possibly software and things in the gym or the playground that make it more accessible and in a way more just specially designed for a child with a disability. The environment is specialized, as I said, for students who have disabilities and whose needs exceed what can be offered in the therapeutic day school environment, or I'm sorry, that exceed what can be offered in the public school environment. And that could be for reasons of behavioral reasons, emotional reasons, or academic reasons. Typically, therapeutic day schools offer clinical support. It is a therapeutic environment, and there is greater access, more round-the-clock access during the school day to mental health professionals. And then just in terms of the environment and the design of the environment itself, they're typically smaller environments. There's a tighter staff-student ratio. They're more structured, and the therapies are integrated throughout the day. So it's not like your child can access the OT at 2 o'clock on Thursdays. The OT is probably available throughout the day, likely pushing into the classroom. It's a more integrated model. And then, as I mentioned, it is a more restrictive placement as well. It's considered more restrictive under the law. And what is meant by restrictive is that there is not access to general education peers within the school building itself. And that is definitionally the way we look at restrictiveness. So Tammy, if you'll turn to the next slide, we'll talk about the placement continuum. You've probably all seen this lovely triangle or pyramid of placement before. It is the placement continuum. And it shows that on the bottom level, we have general education classrooms with no supplemental aids or services. So that is the typical school environment. And then as you move up the pyramid, the environment becomes more restrictive. So there's less access to peers who are typical and who don't have disabilities. And, of course, by the time you get to a private day school environment, it is a school that serves students with disabilities only. And so the student does not have that kind of access to gen ed peers. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk a bit about the way the least restrictive environment requirement works in the law. And it is a preference really for a more gen ed environment or for access to those general education peers. So to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities have to be in those settings with children who are not disabled. And they are only removed, they only move up that triangle to higher levels when the lower level cannot support them. They can't be educated satisfactorily in that lower level, even with supplementary aids and services infused into that environment. If we can go on. So what do you need as a parent or an advocate if you're trying to move to a more restrictive place on that continuum? What you really need, I think of this in terms of looking back and looking forward. So looking back at the public ed setting where the child was, where you want to move them from, you need to be able to say, hey, back there, there's not FAPE. There's not an opportunity for my child to get a free, appropriate public education. There is not an opportunity there for them to be able to make progress. And then you need to be able to say, looking forward to this therapeutic day school where I think my child should be, in that environment, they will be able to access that free appropriate public education. And it's the least restrictive environment because back there, even with additional supports and supplemental services, they weren't able to access FAPE. So ahead of me is the environment with FAPE, and it is the LRE for my child. And then under the Andrew F. case, which I always say the recent Andrew F. case, but now it's 2017, it's not so recent. But the Supreme Court defined what does it mean to say that a child is getting FAPE? You know, how is that defined? And what the Supreme Court said is, well, it's something more than de minimis progress. So if a child is only making de minimis progress or slightly more, that's not enough. So it's not actually a super clean and easy definition, but we do know that. And there's also language in that decision that says that the school must offer an IEP that's reasonably calculated to ensure that the child will make appropriate progress in light of the child's particular circumstances. Okay, if we move on. FAPE supersedes LRE. That is a notion that we say often as attorneys for families. And what we mean by that is that even though a placement that the family wants to move to that is more restrictive, the child can move there if FAPE isn't available in the lesser restrictive environment. So FAPE supersedes LRE. It is more important that the child receive that access to the free appropriate public education than that they have access to their general education peers. It was never intended that they should be with their general education peers if that is done at the expense of them being able to access that minimal level of educational benefit outlined in Andrew F. Okay, next. Thanks, Tammy. So the question arises, this de minimis progress, what is that on? What does that apply to? And the answer is that it applies to academic, functional, social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. So it is not just about your child progressing academically, it's also about them progressing in these other areas. So if you as a parent have evidence that your child is decompensating and is losing their functional skills, or their behavior has really taken a turn for the worse, and suddenly they're getting suspended all the time. You have evidence of the decline of that child's well-being in these other areas. That counts, as well as the failure to make academic progress. So don't ignore those other areas of your whole child. Next. So what we're looking for, as attorneys when we're supporting families, is we're looking for a way to show that the child wasn't receiving FAPE. Remember, I said over your shoulder in the public school. And the best way to do that is to be able to sort of plot their lack of progress over time. So you can see here on this slide an example of a child's Illinois assessment of readiness scores, just simply plotted over time, and you can see that they're declining. And you can go back and plot this data yourself. I have a whole webinar just on how to leverage school data that's part of our library if you want to delve more specifically into that topic. But what you're trying to show, again, is the decline in the students' functioning, well-being, academics, behavior over time. And there are really three sources of information, of data that you can use. And the one is that you, the parents yourselves. Secondly, this data from the school. And then thirdly, data or information from private sources like clinicians or tutors or therapists or neuropsychologists who may be able to provide data to you to use. And we'll speak more specifically about how to use that data as we go on. I do want to make one other remark, though, and that is that although we are often looking at, well, what's the story that this data tells, and how can I show over time that there's been a decline and that my child therefore needs this more restrictive placement? Sometimes there are situations where a family just doesn't have the quote unquote luxury of that longitudinal data. And that can be, for example, if you have a child who is in crisis and it's been a precipitous decline, you may not be able to have this data that shows a decline over time. It happened very suddenly. And in those situations, you may need to rely on something like a psychiatrist's letter who simply says, look, this child is just in such a severe situation right now. They require this more intensive level of service in order to be able to progress. So that is another way of showing that you need a more restrictive placement. If you can go on, Tammy. So the first source of data is you as the parents. This was especially true during the pandemic when the kitchen table kind of became the classroom, and parents really had access to how well their kids were doing or not doing, as the case may be. But you all, even, now that we are beyond the pandemic shutdown time, you may have other sources of information that will be helpful in making your case that your child needs a therapeutic day school. And those are things like that you see that your child is struggling with homework or refusing to go to school. You may also have things like emails from teachers or staff that have been sent home that record issues with your child's lack of progress. And I would just say, remember that when you're collecting this data and bringing this data to the school, you want to be focusing on information that relates to the child's educational experience. So unfortunately, the fact that they may be really dysregulated at home and adversarial to you as parents, for example, if that doesn't have anything to do with their school experience, you're not going to be able to make that connection to the educational experience in order to get the therapeutic day placement. But that said, I want to stress that, if your child that walks in the door and falls on the floor after a long day at school and is completely dysregulated because of the school experience, then that does relate to school. Or if they're refusing to go to school, or you're having confrontations over homework every night. So just try to tie what is happening at home to that educational experience. Next. The second source of data is the school itself. If you think about it, schools are like really fonts of data. They're always testing your kids and producing data about your child. There's standardized tests that are administered to all the kids in the school. And then there's also specifically standardized testing that may be administered to your child, assuming they have an IEP, they're having annual reviews, they're having that triennial review, where the school is taking a deep dive into the child's present levels of performance, doing testing, maybe, intelligence testing like the WISC, or academic achievement testing like the WIAT, or behavioral surveys such as the BASC, or functional assessments like the Vineland. They may be doing curriculum-based measurement in schools such as Ames Web, Dibel, STAR. Maybe you've heard of some of those probes that are used with some frequency in schools to measure a child's progress and to compare them to peers. There's progress reporting on IEP goals. You have that coming in, that data, behavioral data, attendance data, grades, report cards, including comments on report cards, which can be very telling also. Okay, move on. The third, backing up for a second about getting data from the school. So just a quick remark that the way you can get data from the school, you think, oh, I have those, I have those boxes of papers in my closet. You may have a lot of data from the school in that format, but if you want a comprehensive a report from the school about what's everything that the school has about my child. You can make a student records request pursuant to the Illinois statute that's cited here. If you go to your school's website, you can likely find on the website how you can make that request. There's typically somebody who is designated as a records custodian to whom you submit the request, but if not, you can just send it to the principal of the school and make this request for all your students' records. And what that means is that it's everything that specifically identifies your child by name or by student number as well. And so that can include, all their testing over the years and their report cards and their attendance data and behavioral data. It also includes emails and emails that are between staff about your child or with administrators and teachers that you may not have seen. And often that is a source of really interesting and telling information about your child that may not have been previously relayed to you. You can also FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request documents. That is probably better, not for specific information about your child, but if you're trying to learn about a placement or a proposed placement for your child, that can be a way of getting information about a proposed placement. So that's another helpful tool. Okay, if we can move on. The third source is outside professionals and clinicians, and honestly, it's one of the sources that we rely really heavily on. Frankly, when we communicate with clients who are wanting to change their child to a therapeutic day placement, something that we say a lot is, well, you need to get some clinical support for that. Because our role as attorneys and advocates is to be able to argue that the child requires the therapeutic day placement, but the real source of information about the child's needs isn't coming from us. It's coming from the clinicians. So if your child has a private occupational therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, could be a tutor, those can be really helpful, indeed critical sources of information for why your child needs this higher level of support that they would get at a therapeutic day school. So we are often looking for evaluations and recommendations from those providers to support our argument that the child needs the more restrictive placement. And they bring the expertise to the table that then we argue and fit into a legal framework, if that makes sense. So we're trying to get that raw data from the clinicians. Okay, if we can move on. Tammy, can you move to the next slide?
Yeah, there's a question here a minute.
Oh, okay. Very good.
How can I trust standardized testing if I have seen repeatedly how answers are given to the student during school observations?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I think that if you are seeing that happening, you need to be making a record that you are seeing that happening. I would definitely be writing an email that you're seeing your child being fed information. And the other thing is you can get private testing that would be more objective and that could potentially refute skewed results from the school. And I know that happens. I mean, I would say I a child myself who consistently scored very low, like in the single digits on standardized testing. And then one year he got he was like in the 65th percentile in math, and that was clearly not credible. So I know that happens. I would just say in those instances, highlight your concerns, get them in writing, and get objective testing from a private provider. So when we're working with clinicians on evaluations and reports, and they're formulating the reports, but we are looking to those reports to really use to shore up our case for that therapeutic day placement. The key thing that we're really looking at are the recommendations. And what we're asking from the provider and hoping we get from the provider, but whether it's a neuropsych or your private occupational therapist who's working with your child, is for them to describe your child's for them to describe the educational services and supports and the environment that your student needs in a way that's inconsistent with what the district is offering, with the public school offering, and that is consistent with the therapeutic day school where you're trying to get your child into. So we sometimes will say we're looking for elimination criteria. And one example of that would be, maybe your child has sensory needs. And so the occupational therapist describes your child's extreme sensory needs to visual stimuli, to noise, also. And they describe that in detail. And then they say, so this child needs to be in a quiet environment, in a predictable and structured environment where those distractions are not bombarding them. When the clinician says that, they have essentially said, this kiddo cannot be in a public school setting because if you've been in a public school setting, they tend not to be very quiet and controlled and calm and structured, especially if you're like talking about a large middle school. They tend to be more unpredictable and large and overwhelming. So that's what we're looking for, that kind of information that eliminates the public school and that is aligned with what the private therapeutic day school needs to offer. And those kinds of recommendations, that's the backbone of our case. We also ask when we work with the clinicians, will sometimes say, oh, we're never changing their findings, but we might say, can you please use mandatory language? And this is something that is helpful in reports or letters of recommendation supporting a placement. Is sometimes clinicians will say, oh, the child will benefit from, but under the law, the standard isn't that the school needs to do everything that benefits the kid. Even though we wish that was the standard, that's not the standard. So we will say, can you just be clear that the child needs this placement, that they need this intervention, that this intervention or service is necessary. Use that imperative language. That's something you can be on the lookout for too, as you collect data and recommendations and letters of support from your providers. Okay, if we can move on.
Someone has a question about recommending private testing providers. So maybe we can just speak to that and how we do that.
About how we recommend particular providers? Is that the nature of the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a list that we recommend or how we recommend them.
So we sure do. Over the years, Matt has worked with many, many clients and has relationship with providers of all kinds, certainly with neuropsychologists, but also with, OTs or speech therapists, and has a kind of amazing catalog in his brain about providers who we've worked with in the past who have been of great service to our clients. And we do share that information, keeping in mind where you're physically located, because obviously it's not going to do you a great service if we're recommending a provider that's, 30 miles from where you live. But yes, we do recommend providers to use, and then, encourage you to go and meet with them and vet them on your own. But we can give some ideas as to people who have been helpful, who we've worked with in the past. Sure. So various paths to the therapeutic day school setting. The first way is really the easiest way, and that is that you are able to get the school district to agree with you that the placement needs to be made. The child's placement needs to change to a therapeutic day school placement through the IEP process itself. So that means going to the IEP meeting and making the argument and persuading the district that that is indeed what is required. Another way is a unilateral placement, and that is usually after step one has not worked. And a family may say, my child requires this placement. Say they're trying to place their child at Cove or Hyde Park Day. And they go to the school, they visit it, they get their child admitted, and they simply make the placement themselves. But what they are doing in that instance is making a unilateral placement, or sometimes it's called parentally placed. And the idea is that they're later going to go back to the district and request that the district reimburse that. And before they make that move, they are providing what you would want to do before you do a unilateral placement is to provide notice to the district that is your intent to make that placement. It's a very simple form letter that basically says, I'm making the placement. I'm giving you at least 10 days, 10 business days notice that I'm going to be placing my child at whatever school it is. I'm doing it because you school district did not provide my child with a free appropriate public education. And I intend to hold you responsible for the fees and costs in this therapeutic day placement. And you want to do that because it's like a place marker. It saves your right to be able to go after the school later on. Even if you decide not to later on, you want to make the notice so that you have preserved that option. But in the meantime, you are assuming the financial risk. So you're signing the contract and you are, anticipating that you may be able to get reimbursement because you're going after the school district and you have an argument, and maybe you've hired us as your attorneys and we're going to file for due process. We're going to get you reimbursed, or at least do our best to do that. But in the meantime, you are assuming the risk. So you have to that it is an option that is only open to families who can front that initial payment of tuition to the therapeutic day school. And we recognize that not everybody can do that. The other way to get a placement is through settlement with the district. That will often come after a family has filed for mediation or due process. Even if we file for due process, we engage the mediation process first in order to try to resolve in a less expensive, less resource demanding way with the district, and typically are successful in that. If we can move on. So putting the case together for private therapeutic day school, the pieces that we've talked about, this is just kind of a summary, are that you're making the case that the district is not providing FAPE where the child is in the public school environment. And you're supporting that with all your data that you've gotten from, that you have collected, that you've gotten from private providers and that you've gotten from the school, and you've been able to show that lack of progress over time, or a critical situation that requires this intensive, immediate, higher level of service. You're also arguing other lesser restrictives have been tried and haven't worked, and that even if the school offered additional supplemental services or supports, they likely wouldn't work either. Similar things have been tried and haven't worked. I mention that because a lot of times the school district will say, well, we could do one more thing. Let's do one more thing. And you have to be able to argue against that, why that one more thing at this point isn't going to make a difference for your child. It's not going to lead them to being able to have that access to a free, appropriate public education. You also have your team, your private team of whatever private providers you have, or clinicians who have described your child's need in detail and in a way that's consistent with the placement that you want to get your child to, the therapeutic day school, and that is completely inconsistent with the public school environment. And then you may also have explored therapeutic day schools. You may have visited, you may even have applied. If you're trying to get your child into a private therapeutic day school, and you can say, we've already been to Hyde Park Day and they accepted my student, that is another nice piece to kind of the package of your argument. Okay, next. So what does the therapeutic day placement process kind of look like? If you're going through the IEP process and the district agrees to make a placement at the therapeutic day school, they typically, the first thing they do is they will say at the meeting, are there any particular placements that you're interested in? And if there are, that's when you want to say, yes, there are, or even, yes, my child has already been accepted the Sonia Shankman O School, or whatever the placement is, if you have it. But if you're not that far along and you simply have some names, that is the time that we share names of placements. Typically, the school district will, as long as the placement is, as long as the school meets or accepts students who have your child's disabilities, is within a reasonable distance, usually school districts will agree to look to private therapeutic day schools that the parents are interested in. Every now and again, I've had a school say, no, we don't agree that that would be an appropriate placement. But for the most part, they will indulge the parent. They may also have additional ideas of their own of schools that they think we should explore. And we're open often to many of them, and then occasionally we'll say not that one with a particular, if there's particular schools that we have had a bad experience with, occasionally we will advise against that. And the parent ultimately is, in a sense, a decision maker on this, because the next sort of logistical thing is that the school district is sharing information about the student with the therapeutic day school in order to get the student accepted. And they call that the packet. They are sharing the student's packet with the therapeutic day school. The referral packet typically includes things like the student's last IEP, if they've had a behavioral intervention plan. It may include the most recent neuropsychological evaluation, the most recent triennial evaluation. It's basic information that the school would want to know about the child in deciding, can we accommodate this child in our school? And the parent needs to release that information. So it is up to the parent to decide whether the packet gets sent to any particular therapeutic day school. So in that sense, they are controlling which ones are explored, because you as the parent are deciding where the packet gets sent to. You can, if a school is interested in pursuing the child's application, they may invite the family to visit the school. Absolutely, you should do that. They typically want to meet the student. Sometimes they'll have a shadow day where the student goes and spends half a day at the prospective therapeutic day placement and visits. And then the school is deciding, how did they fit in? Is there an appropriate peer group for the student? Can we meet the student's needs? And then they are either accepting or not accepting the student. If sometimes if the family is exploring a number of options and the school is exploring a number of options, I'll literally just make a chart of the various schools and where they are in the process of being accepted, where they, is the school pursuing it? Has the family visited? Have they gotten an offer of acceptance? That can be helpful if you've kind of scattered the seed widely and you're looking at a lot of placements and you just want to keep them straight in your head. And then the therapeutic day school will typically let the school know whether they're accepting the child or not. Sometimes we get questions from parents, well, like, do we get to pick? And the answer is, if more than one therapeutic day school accepts the child, the parent does get to choose. By sending out the packet, the school district is really saying, we're okay with this placement. So then, whichever ones accept the child, the parent can choose from. Do we ever get a situation where the parent doesn't like a placement that they visit? Yeah, that does come up. So parents will say, can we say no to a placement? And the answer to that is you can say no to a particular placement as long as there are other ones, but it does get problematic if a parent rejects all the possible placements. Because the district is making an offer of faith by making those placements available. And if the district is saying no to, if the family is saying no to everything, then we get into a pickle. Now, I would say that I have had situations where either all possible therapeutic day schools have simply declined the student, or maybe one has accepted them, but the family has well-grounded reasons that are supported by a clinician as to why that placement is not appropriate for that child. Like, Maybe they use a methodology of behavioral management that the child has reacted to very poorly in the past. Sometimes in those situations, the district will agree via settlement, so outside of the actual placement process, but via settlement to place the child in a non-ISB approved school. So it kind of, in that situation, you may be able to look outside the ISB approved box if you're not getting anywhere with the ones that have been approved and that have been suggested by the school and to which packets had been sent. If we can move along. So what happens in the meantime? This child should continue to participate if they're in a public school. Maybe they're in a specialized classroom in the public school. They should continue to be able to attend where they were in the meantime. But that said, there occasionally are situations where the child cannot attend because, for example, the parent has simply removed them from school, doesn't feel that they are safe in that environment. Maybe they've had a number of recent disciplinary measures have been invoked and they're feeling uncomfortable with the child continuing to attend. Typically during this window, as a parent, you can, if the child is not attending, you can ask for instruction, homebound instruction to be provided to your child, and the school district will provide that so that the child is at least getting access to, the minimal free appropriate public education via homebound instruction. Homebound instruction is generally minimal. It might be like an hour a day. It doesn't really make up for school, but it's at least something. And we try, and the districts try to make these placements happen pretty quickly, but they don't always. And so, be advised that it may be a few weeks for the child to actually be able to move to the new school, for you to explore placement options, to be accepted. It isn't generally a kind of a next day thing unless you've already made that arrangement where your child is already accepted. And even in that scenario, it's likely to take some period of time to get the child actually situated in the new school. But it's much better than a residential placement, which is a more time-consuming process. If we can move on to the next slide. So when it comes to locating a therapeutic day school, the school has to be licensed to serve the students' primary eligibility category. So you know how on your child's IEP, there's that eligibility category line that is filled in, and you have that conversation regularly with the school district about their eligibility for special education services. That matters for a number of reasons, and one of them is it comes up here in the search for the private therapeutic day school, because essentially these therapeutic day schools are licensed to serve certain populations of students. So certain populations of students whose primary eligibility is X, and they're not licensed to serve others. And you need to be sure that there is a match between the school and your child. Otherwise, you will not be able to get a placement there. So that is important at the get-go. And if you are having a placement through the school district is placing that child in an ISB approved placement. So an Illinois State Board of Education approved placement. So as I alluded to earlier, unless you're doing this through settlement, it has to be approved by the Illinois State Board of Education, or unless you are unilaterally placing. If you are unilaterally placing, you also do not have to have an ISB approved placement. If you're thinking, oh my gosh, well, how do I find out about all these schools? The Illinois State Board of Education does maintain a website that has a search engine. If you look up Illinois State Board of Education private facility search, you will find this search engine. I have to tell you or warn you, it is a clunky search engine. It is awkward and not easy to use, but it's, better than nothing. And it is a way that you can put in information about your child, including their eligibility category, their age and location, like within so many miles of your home, and generate the names of schools that are ISB approved that meet those criteria. So it is, minimally helpful. You of course also want to be thinking about travel time when you're making these decisions. There is a 1 hour guideline in the Illinois state statute. We do have students who are clients of ours who travel, an hour, even an hour and 20 minutes on a bus to get to their placement. But you do need to be cognizant of how your child will manage that time in transportation when you're making these kind of decisions, because the district will provide transportation to your child if they are providing a day school placement through the placement process. And that will look like a cab, a bus, one of those small buses, a van that comes to your house every day and picks up your child and brings them to school and brings them home afterwards, which is certainly a beautiful thing. But your child is not going to be the only child in that van or that cab. And they're going to have a route, and that's going to lengthen the commute time. So whereas it might be 45 minutes for you to drive to Safe Haven School, but once they're in a shared cab with other students, that route might be significantly longer. So that's something to keep in mind as you're looking for schools. You want to be sure that the grade level is appropriate for your child too. If your child is, say, in 5th grade, or let's say they're in 8th grade, or you're applying to Hyde Park Day serves students only until 8th grade. And so looking forward, that wouldn't be a good plan. So pay attention to the grade levels, the age span that is served by the school as well. And talk to other parents about their placements if you can. Parents who have been there are a terrific source of information. Okay, next slide. Once a student starts at the TDS, what is the involvement of the district? The district will continue to be part of IEP meetings. In CPS, the person who participates is the district representative, and the district representative will attend IEP meetings going forward and be part of the conversation. However, everyone else in the conversation, the IEP meeting, is somebody who is at the therapeutic day school. This sometimes comes as a kind of a great relief to parents who may have had, difficult IEP meetings in the past at their home school. They are really excited when they go to a therapeutic day school, and the whole cast of characters changes, and all the people around the table are the providers from the therapeutic day school. It is somewhat refreshing to have some new faces at that point. And so the conversation tends to shift, because the participants are now the therapeutic day school speech therapist and your child's OT and the administrator from the therapeutic day school. And they are the ones making the decision about whether your child is going to stay or not. Now, the DR, the district representative, is part of that conversation too. But there are lots of other adults at the table from the therapeutic day school who are weighing into that decision as well. So let's move on to the next slide. I'm watching the time here. When my child moves to a therapeutic day school, will they have the same IEP? So the answer is they'll start out with the IEP from the home district. However, they will likely update it. Some schools have kind of like a 60-day process, others have a 45-day process at which they will revisit the IEP and basically retool it in a way that that fits with the resources and the structure that they have at the therapeutic day school. Sometimes, as Christine mentioned on her slide here, they have a separate document and individualized learning plan that they use in conjunction with the IEP. But there may be a modification of that IEP once the child is in the therapeutic day school, to kind of, as I said, to be consistent with the model of the therapeutic day school. If we can move on. Can the students stay involved at the public school while at the therapeutic day school? Yes, they can. The child should have a right to participate in the homeschool extracurriculars and events, and that may require some modification by the public school to make reasonable accommodations to permit that to happen. You know, they may need some, if they have physical disability, they want to participate in a sports team, there may need to be modifications that are made to make that happen. But it is a great idea, actually, to have your child continue to participate in activities that are occurring at the home school, clubs and sporting events, because it keeps that connection to the home community and may keep the child connected to friends in the neighborhood. And in the event that the child transitions back to the public school, that connection or thread is going to make that easier. I do note here that that Illinois, there may be constraints on the child's participation in, for example, athletics, although they're required to make reasonable accommodations, there can be limits to that. Having a disability does not mean that your child is automatically on the sports team. They still can have criteria that would maybe make your child not able to participate, just like other kids are not able to participate on teams, but they do need to make the process non-discriminatory and to make reasonable changes that could allow that participation. Let's move on to the next slide. How does attendance work? So the attendance is reflected in the student's transcript, their attendance at the public school. And the therapeutic day school will follow the criteria for graduation based on the student's transition goals, and will provide classes that meet the minimum Illinois State Board of Education requirements. So they may not have the same repertoire that your public school does. You know, if you've got a kid in high school at New Trier and you are changing them to a therapeutic day school, they're not going to have, 18 kinds of music classes available at the therapeutic day school. It's going to be a more limited scope of classes, but they will be aligned with the Illinois State Board of Education basic requirements for graduating from high school. So that it won't be as if, now my child doesn't have the credits to graduate. It will be worked out in a way that your child is getting access to the course load that is necessary for them to be able to obtain a degree. And on the formal transcript, it will, your child's classes will be marked and their grades, but not the therapeutic day school. That won't be indicated, simply the classes and the grades. You move on to the next one. Will my student get a diploma from their public school? Yes, and they can participate in graduation ceremonies. So even if you're graduating from Cove, your child would have the right to participate in graduation at their home school. There are occasionally parents who, if you're at the high school level, may want to pause on actually pulling the diploma, because once your student actually formally, technically graduates, they would no longer be eligible for continuing transition services past high school. So if you want your child to be able to access those services, you don't want them to graduate, but that doesn't mean they can't participate in graduation, because as we all know, there's nothing in that tube that you get handed on stage anyway. They can participate and go to the parties and have all the festivities. They just don't technically graduate. You have the school hold the actual diploma until you are ready to get it, or your child ages out of the IDEA eligibility. Next slide. What happens if my student moves from one district to another while attending the therapeutic day school? What happens then? And the answer is simply that the existing school, the school where your current, oh good, I see Christine is joining. If your student, if you're moving to a new district, the place that you are coming from, who was supporting the placement, is no longer required once you move outside of that actual district. If you move within the district is still responsible for continuing the placement. But if you move outside the district is no longer responsible for continuing to maintain the therapeutic day school placement. But the new school that you're going to, the new district, is going to need to provide comparable services to what your child had been receiving where they were coming from. And so that may mean a placement at a comparable day school that is somewhere near the new district that you are moving to. And the new district is either implementing the IEP and adopting the existing IEP from the district that you're coming from, or they're developing their own. But until they develop their own, they are responsible for implementing the existing IEP and providing comparable services during that window of time. Next slide. Christine, do you want to jump in? Are you able to speak about I don't know if you have audio, do you want to jump in and?
You know what, Jill, I think the
Introduce yourself.
best way, if you're comfortable continuing to read the slide, and then I can give some anecdotal information about my experience with my own son at the end.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Thank you.
So, so sometimes a question arises, well, my child is going to this therapeutic day school. I've worked so hard to get them there. How long are they going to be there? And there is no real set answer to that question, other than to say that it will be reevaluated every year as placement is part of the annual IEP conversation that occurs. And the parent or guardian is a member of that team, so you have a voice in that discussion and that conversation about when it makes sense to transition your child back to the public school environment, if indeed it does. Typically, therapeutic day school placements last at least a year, and often 2 and sometimes much longer. It can depend a little on the nature of the placement and the reasons that are motivating it. And of course, it depends on where the student is at that annual IEP meeting, and you're looking at, and you're considering their options and how far they've developed during the time that they have been there. There are students who really thrive in the therapeutic day school environment and end up just staying there. And then there are others who do return to the public school environment. And, that is preferable, and from a lesser restrictive environment perspective, that, let's get the child back into closer to that gen ed environment and having more time with general education peers. That sometimes that isn't possible, and other times it is. And students are able to participate too in transition services. So if you're wondering, well, where's the endpoint in all this IDEA services? The answer is that if you don't pull that diploma, as I mentioned earlier, your child can stay eligible for services until they turn 22, except that now there's a law in Illinois that says if they turn 22 during the school year, they can continue to receive services under the IDEA through the end of the school year. And that's nice because what it means is that it used to be that your child turns 22 and the next day the bus doesn't come. And that was really just disruptive to students' lives. And so now you can your child finishes out that school year, which is a good thing. So next slide.
There's a question on here that what do you do when the therapeutic school team says that your child should go back full-time to the regular school, but the school district is refusing that?
I think you find another therapeutic day school. I have to say, I haven't had that situation arise, but if the home school district doesn't feel like they can meet the child's needs and you agree, it seems like you need to find another therapeutic day school setting that would support your child and support their continued education in that setting. And there is a push-pull sometimes, and often it's actually the reverse, where what you have is the homeschool district saying, oh, we want them back, and the therapeutic day school saying, I don't think they're ready. And sometimes there's conflict over that. But I would say that if the therapeutic day school in that situation, which I realize is the flip side of what you were asking, in that situation, typically the voice of the therapeutic day school saying that the child is not ready to return is going to be given considerable weight. So when we talk about supporting your child's transition back from the therapeutic day school, just a few pieces of advice quickly. One, I'd suggest that you don't burn the bridge with the public school. And what I mean by that is sometimes these situations are super contentious, and the parent is really angry, often for good reason, at the public school. But what I would suggest is that you don't entirely, burn it down. Because at some point your child may need to return to that setting, and you don't want those relationships to have gone up in flames. And you also don't want to be speaking really negatively about that setting, those administrators in front of your child, because if your child is returning to the public school environment, you don't want them to be biased against the school. You don't want them to be thinking, oh, my parents say this is such a bad place, they can't stand Principal X. So try to be mindful of that. Maintain your students' connection to the public school through friends and extracurricular activities and sports, as we mentioned earlier. And just be sure that in those IEP meetings that you're voicing that interest in returning your child to a more integrated environment, and that you maybe are talking about, well, how will we know when my child is ready to make that change? What are some criteria that we could be looking at that would be measurable, so that we can ascertain, okay, now they're ready or now they're not, but let's develop some objective criteria so that we know. And the other thing is you can think about a partial enrollment situation where your transition to the back into the public school setting is gradual. So if we turn to the next slide, I can address that now. It is possible to have a split situation. Just trying to take all this information on the slide and just down very quickly is that sometimes it is a good idea, as you think about getting your child prepared to be able to go back in with their gen ed peers in the public school setting, to think about, well, could they go for part of the day? Could they start with an extracurricular activity or a sport? I know a child who, started by playing soccer at the public school. Or joining a club, doing an after school activity to start making that connection. And then sometimes school districts will arrange, along with the therapeutic day school, to have a split schedule where they do part of the day at the private therapeutic day school and part of the day in the public school. And then it increasingly becomes more public school, and then the child just shifts over at some point. This is more feasible when the private therapeutic day school is not super far distance-wise from the public school, because obviously the logistics are a complicating factor. If you had to have your child, bust an hour between the settings, it's not going to work. So distance is a consideration in that aspect. Christine, did you want to talk about anything that CPS does in this field?
Sure. And I can talk about my own experience with my son, who's been in a therapeutic day school setting since 7th grade, but now he's a sophomore. And it's really the discussions about a transition back into the public school setting have been not only guided by myself, but by my son. And the school team is, working collaboratively to decide what that might look like for him and how to best support that. And we've been talking a lot about a partial transition. So when you're dealing with CPS, everything is a little bit different, but they do have what they call a dual or a secondary enrollment, and they do support a partial transition back into the public school setting. There are some intricacies around, typically they're aiming for your neighborhood school, your school that's in boundary, but because a lot of the schools in Chicagoland are far from where you might live, there is flexibility. So we're looking, for example, my son started playing sports at his neighborhood school this year. And there are some little factors, like at a high school level, the IHSA eligibility comes into play. So we just work with our therapeutic team through our district's district representative to share his grades weekly so that he can maintain eligibility requirements and things like that. And as we're looking into next year, distance is factor and the logistics of a partial transition come into play there. And the district has been open to looking at other schools that might be closer. And that might be either a half day. So half day in the morning at the therapeutic day school and the other half of the day in the public school setting. Or it could be something just like we're looking at if he could have the opportunity to take a more rigorous math class in a public school setting. And we've got some flexibility in choosing the school because of the distance and what might be the best way to meet all of his minutes and needs during the school day.
Thank you. Tammy, if you want to move on, I think we're closing it down here. Oh, yes, we are. Were there any questions that anyone wants to raise at this point?
There was one question, if we know what year that law went into effect, that if you turn 22 during the school year, you're allowed to stay for the rest of that school year rather than the day after your 22nd birthday. Do either of you know that off the top?
Pardon me? It is Illinois House Bill 40. I can tell you that. It was passed, I think it was July of maybe 20. It was between 2020 and 2022. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it was during COVID. I think it might have been 22.
But as I say, it's Illinois House Bill 40, and you can Google it and learn more about it there. But yeah, it was a good move because there's just less disruption for students, particularly who are dependent on the structure of school and the social relationships there. It's much better that they don't have to stop mid-year on their birthday and they can finish out the year. There was some good legislation there.
There's another question. If a student is 2E and attending a therapeutic day school, is the school required to meet their academic needs based on their giftedness or above grade level work? What if the available therapeutic schools don't have academics at the appropriate level?
Yeah, you definitely raise a good question here, because it is the case that often the therapeutic day schools are focused on healing the student, particularly if they have an emotional disability, and that the priority is less on academics. And so we do have certain schools that we will recommend depending on the child's what their exceptionality is in terms of their disability, that cater more that essentially were a more rigorous academic life is available, where there's a little bit more challenge to the curriculum. So we do have a sense of which schools might be able to offer that more than others. But it is difficult, and just even in the general ed setting, even in the public school setting, students who are 2E still have entitlement to the IDE rights, of course, but giftedness is not itself considered a disability, and so it's not accommodated in the same way. So I think that might be a situation where something like a dual placement might be appropriate if the school is willing to allow your student access to, say, a typical, the math class in the gen ed setting that might be more challenging and more rigorous for your student. That might be one option to accommodate a student who just has a greater level of academic ability. I guess that's kind of what comes to mind in terms of how you might meet that challenge. It is a difficult one. Anything else?
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Tammy. Then I think we'll wrap it up because we are beyond the time, but I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And as I said, this meeting will be recorded and available in our library of webinars for you to check out. And feel free also, if you have additional follow-up questions, just to reach out to me individually. Happy to do that. Thank you, Christine, for joining, and thank you, Tammy, for running this whole thing, and hope everybody has a good afternoon.